Marine life thrives in a delicate balance beneath the ocean's glittering surface, revealing a world of both beauty and danger. Sharks inspire fear and wonder. Their existence is a testament to the unadulterated power of nature. Though shark attacks are rare, they captivate us and serve as a reminder of the wild world beneath the waves. While often misinterpreted, these interactions reveal the complex dance between humans and the creatures of the ocean. By exploring this dynamic, we gain insight into the dangers and the deep respect we must have for the mysteries of marine ecosystems. Here are 6 tales. The waters off Oregon's coast were notoriously erratic. Deep trenches, icy temperatures, and strong currents made this area both dangerous and strategically important for military operations. About 30 miles west of Astoria, this was where the United States Navy had been going on secret reconnaissance trips. Long used as a test site for underwater surveillance technology, the region was frequently covered in mist and beaten by unrelenting waves. The United States ship Vanguard, a mid-sized naval reconnaissance ship, had a specialized team assigned to the mission of deploying the Aegis 7, a sophisticated underwater drone, on the morning of March 1, 2025. High-resolution sonar and long-range transmission capabilities were features of the drone, which was made for collecting deep-sea intelligence. It was designed to monitor activity along the ocean floor to look for irregularities and unidentified objects. The mission was led by Lieutenant Commander Elias Harlow, a seasoned naval officer with years of experience in underwater reconnaissance, sonar technician Kellen Voss, drone operator Draven Holt, and a few other crew members in charge of operation monitoring were part of his team. At least they thought the deployment was standard procedure. The Aegis 7 was lowered into the water at exactly 7:30 a.m. After turning on its thrusters, the drone slowly descended into the icy pitch-black abyss. The United States ship Vanguard's monitors showed the live feed, including the rocky seabed schools of fish scuttling through the currents and the occasional shadow from a larger object. Flying the drone through a narrow trench was Draven Holt, who was positioned at the control panel. Rhythmically, the sonar pinged, looking for any odd activity. The mission appeared to be proceeding without any problems. The feed then abruptly began to flicker. From the shadows came a huge figure moving at a terrifying pace. A tremendous amount of force struck the drone before anyone could react. After the impact, the Aegis 7 went into a violent spiral, causing its camera feed to distort into static before briefly refocusing. Kellen Voss's face tightened as he leaned forward. Large and swift, a shark circled the drone, detected by the sonar. Almost immediately, the realization struck: a great white shark. The shark was enormous, with an estimated length of more than 16 feet. Its powerful body moved precisely, its torpedo-like form effortlessly slicing through the water. At first, it seemed to be watching the drone, circling it with deliberate curiosity. However, it struck again, as though triggered by the vibrations or the strange presence. The second impact was far more violent than the first. The Aegis 7's thrusters stuttered, and its stabilizers malfunctioned. Draven fought to regain control, but the drone was spinning and sinking dangerously deeper. Despite his tendency to avoid needless panic, Elias Harlow acknowledged the gravity of the situation. The multi-million-dollar piece of equipment would be lost to the depths if they lost the drone, jeopardizing their mission. He commanded that it be returned. Draven triggered the retrieval command, which made the drone climb. Struggling against the pressure, the thrusters whirred, but the shark wasn't done yet. It trailed along its motions, becoming increasingly unpredictable. The shark then charged upward in a move that went against normal behavior, hitting the drone again. A portion of the drone's exterior was broken by the impact, revealing internal wiring. Before the feed went entirely dark, sparks burst from it. Dead was the Aegis 7. The crew started the emergency retrieval procedures after turning off the drone. After activating its winch system, the Vanguard slowly raised the now dead drone back to the surface. A much more terrifying turn of events occurred during this process. The shark surfaced. Now fully visible, the great white smashed through the water with startling speed, its dorsal fin cutting through the waves before crashing into the side of the boat. The crew felt a shock as the impact echoed through the hull. Kellen Voss stepped away from the railing again, muttering to himself that this was not normal. The shark wasn't just investigating, it was attacking. As the crew hurried to secure the drone, the shark continued to move, its body brushing the hull as it circled violently. Then it charged once more without hesitation. The Vanguard rocked violently. Some crew members stumbled as the equipment shifted. Even Elias Harlow, who had maintained his composure, realized they were ill-prepared to deal with this. Their ship was not built for combat, much less to face a 16-foot great white shark. The only option was to back off. Elias ordered them to disengage from the drone and return to land. Draven Holt allowed the destroyed Aegis 7 to descend into the abyss by turning off the retrieval system. The shark followed it down, momentarily distracted, then surfaced again. When the Vanguard accelerated away, the engines roared to life. The shark chased after it, its dorsal fin slicing through the water perilously near the stern. For several excruciating moments, it appeared determined to pursue them all the way back to shore. Then it disappeared as abruptly as it had appeared. For the rest of the voyage, the crew stayed on edge. Nobody said much as they all processed what had just happened. An underwater drone being attacked by a great white was already unusual. However, deliberately attacking a naval ship was a completely different matter. Once back on base, the incident was classified right away. Experts were consulted, theories were discussed, and reports were filed. According to some theories, the electromagnetic signals from the drone may have agitated the shark. Aggression against a boat of that size was almost unheard of, but some thought it was territorial behavior. However, Elias Harlow had a different theory. Nature needed no explanation at times. At times, the ocean served as a simple reminder to humanity that it was not under their authority. They never found the Aegis 7, and the Great White, it vanished from view. However, the crew of the United States ship Vanguard would always remember that day and the unrelenting power of nature they had experienced. The opulent cruise ship Celestial Serenity was well known for its lavish itineraries along Australia's east coast, which provided stunning views of the Great Barrier Reef. By the 3rd day of June 2024, the ship was halfway through a 7-day voyage from Brisbane to Cairns. Among the more than 2,000 passengers on board was Portland, Oregon-based Rachel Simmons, a 33-year-old financial consultant. With the expectation of a week of cocktails, sunbathing, and relaxation, she had planned the trip as a much-needed getaway from the demands of her career. With its many eateries, casinos, and swimming pools, the Celestial Serenity was a floating city. However, despite their splendor, cruise ships had risks, unseen dangers that lurked beneath the surface of an otherwise idyllic getaway. Rachel boarded the ship with her best friend Lillian Mercer, who enjoyed late-night parties. Rachel liked quieter times, like reading on the deck or drinking wine while taking in the sunset, in contrast to Lillian. However, she acted in an unusual way on the evening of June 3rd. Rachel had been enjoying the ocean breeze on the upper deck close to the ship's railing at approximately 10:45 p.m. In addition to the distant sounds of music from the onboard nightclub, the air was heavy with humidity and smelled of salt water. The deck lights shimmered against the dark waves below as the ship swayed slightly. According to later reports from other passengers, Rachel was using her phone in one hand and holding a glass of wine in the other. Some thought she had leaned over the railing too much, while others conjectured she had been attempting to take a selfie. Whatever the precise reason, tragedy struck suddenly. Rachel lost her balance as the ship shook a little, perhaps from a small wave. Before she fell over the railing, witnesses remembered a brief, startled gasp. The sound of her body striking the water was muffled by the constant conversation of the passengers and the ship's engines. Nobody noticed for a while. The ship kept going without noticing the lone figure that was now having difficulty in the ocean below. Only a few seconds later, Adrian Velasco, a retired Argentinian schoolteacher, realized what had happened. He notified a crew member in the vicinity, who promptly radioed for assistance. Rachel came to the surface panting. She could only make out the ship's lights in the distance above her, and the realization of her situation made her heart race. In an attempt to stay afloat, she kicked her legs frantically, but the ocean was huge and unending. Marine life, including sea turtles, vibrant fish, and regrettably apex predators, was abundant in the waters close to the Great Barrier Reef. Numerous shark species, including tiger sharks, bull sharks, and the most dreaded of all, the great white shark, could be found on the reef. The splashes made by Rachel had not gone unheard. Shadows moved beneath her. The crew sprang into action aboard the ship. The sound of searchlights sweeping across the water was followed by the man overboard alarm. The security crew hurried to deploy emergency lifeboats, but due to the ship's size, they couldn't be retrieved immediately, as it would take time to slow down and turn around. When she heard the announcement, Lillian, who had been inside the nightclub, rushed to the railing. She became terrified when she realized her best friend was somewhere out there, lost in the dark abyss. The crew was already doing everything they could, but she begged them to hurry. Captain Elias Renwood was on the bridge organizing the rescue. A lifeboat with trained crew members was lowered after the ship's global positioning system recorded Rachel's last known location. However, the ocean was unforgiving, and each minute seemed to drag on forever. Although Rachel was still alive, she was starting to feel tired. Despite her best efforts to conserve energy, it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to tread water. The ship's distant hum was the only sound in the eerily quiet night. At that moment, she noticed a dorsal fin cutting through the water. Breathing became painful as she was surrounded by more fins. She could feel the movement of the ocean all around her. A school of sharks had found her. An 18-foot great white, the largest of them, circled slowly and purposefully. It was likely that their hunting instincts were triggered by Rachel's erratic movements. As she tried to remain still, hoping they would lose interest, her heart raced. But they didn't. The first blow came from below. An enormous object brushed against her leg, startling her, followed by intense pain. There was a sharp burning sensation as teeth sank into flesh. Her scream was barely audible over the waves. The surrounding water darkened. The rescue crew saw the disturbance. The horror unfolding before them was illuminated by searchlights. Crew member Declan Firth later compared the scene to something out of a nightmare. Having seen Rachel barely visible amid the churning water, her body being pulled under in violent jerks. When the lifeboat arrived, it was already too late. A red stain fading into the waves was the only sign of Rachel. The sharks had done what nature had designed them to do. The passengers and crew were rocked by the tragedy. Feeling guilty for not being with Rachel at that time, Lillian was distraught. Some travelers stopped their journey at the next port because they were so scared of the incident. The cruise line's safety protocols were the subject of an investigation by the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. The incident prompted concerns regarding railing heights, emergency response times, and the dangers of cruising in shark-prone waters, even though the ship had complied with standard procedures. Devastated, Rachel's family advocated for more stringent onboard safety regulations. Her name became a grim reminder of the ocean's dangers, a cautionary tale for those who let their guard down, even for a moment. In the following months, the incident became the subject of news articles, documentaries, and safety seminars. It was referred to as a preventable tragedy by some and a freak accident by others. However, for those who had been present that evening, it was a completely different experience. It was a reminder of the ocean's vastness, harshness, and complete indifference, and how even the most opulent getaways can occasionally turn into nightmares. Under a clear sky, the Indian Ocean stretched into infinity, its surface glistening under the intense Australian sun. The waters near the small Western Australian town of Exmouth were renowned for their abundance of marine life, including schools of fish swimming through coral reefs, languid sea turtles, and, of course, the occasional great white sharks cruising the ocean floor. Exmouth had long been a destination for deep-sea fishing enthusiasts, drawn by the promise of massive tuna, marlin, and trevally. The ocean here was both a paradise and a danger zone, a place where the beauty of nature coexisted with its raw, untamed brutality. In these waters, on April 12, 2024, Ryan Foster, an experienced but reckless sailor, set out on his final fishing trip. Ryan Foster was not a man known for caution. At 42 years old, he had spent most of his life on the ocean, moving from one fishing job to another, never staying in one place for too long. He had sailed across the Pacific, fished in the icy waters off Alaska, and even had a brief, unsuccessful stint as a tour guide for shark cage diving. His friends often joked that he had more luck with fish than with people. But Ryan had a flaw. He enjoyed pushing limits. He had a tendency to test nature, seeing how close he could get to danger without falling in. He wasn't reckless in an outright foolish way, but he lacked the respect that many seasoned sailors had for the ocean and its creatures. That morning he had set out in his 22-foot fishing boat, the Blue Marlin, stocked with bait, tackle, and a cooler full of beer. He planned to spend the day fishing alone, far from the crowded tourist spots. With no radio contact, he relied instead on his instincts and a global positioning system tracker, which he rarely checked. By mid-afternoon, Ryan had already caught several large fish, storing them in a cooler at the back of his boat. The ocean was calm, the sun was relentless, and the beer had started to warm in its can. Then he saw it, a shadow beneath the surface, massive and slow-moving. At first, it was just a dark shape gliding under the boat, but as it circled back, he got a better look. A great white shark, at least 14 feet long, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a blade. Ryan had seen sharks before, but this one was different. It wasn't just passing through, it was lingering, watching. For a while, he simply observed it, fascinated by the way it moved and the effortless way it owned the water. Then he had an idea. Ryan opened his cooler and pulled out one of the fish he had caught earlier, a large, freshly killed tuna. He dangled it over the edge of the boat, watching as the shark moved closer. The great white didn't lunge immediately. It circled cautiously, but interested. Amused by its hesitation, Ryan tossed the fish into the water. The shark briefly disappeared before reappearing, grabbing the bait with a single snap of its jaws. Ryan chuckled to himself. Encouraged, he caught another fish and held it just above the water. The shark returned, but this time it did more than simply devour the fish. It caused a violent bump to the boat. Ryan staggered after the impact shook the blue marlin violently. His beer overturned, spilling all over the deck. Before he could react, the shark struck again, more forcefully this time, slamming into the side of the boat. Ryan lost his footing and splashed into the water, momentarily stunned by the cold. When fishing by himself, he never wore a life jacket, so he wasn't wearing one now. His hands fumbled for the side of the boat as he surfaced, gasping for air. However, the shark was quicker. The great white lunged and closed its jaws around his left leg before he could reach safety. The agony was sudden, intense, and irreversible. While thrashing and screaming, Ryan attempted to strike the shark's muzzle, but it only tightened its grip. The water quickly turned into a dark cloud as the blood spread throughout it. He struggled toward the boat for a moment after the shark released him, but it wasn't enough. The shark circled back and attacked from below this time. It pulled him under with its strong jaws clamped around his torso. The altercation was brief. The conflict was swallowed by the ocean, which replaced it with a haunting quiet. All that remained was the soft sound of waves crashing against the blue marlin. It took hours for anyone to notice the boat cruising aimlessly. Just before sunset, the Coral Tide, a passing fishing vessel, spotted it. A few fish were scattered across the floor. The cooler was overturned, and the deck was deserted. Ryan Foster was nowhere to be found. After calling the police and conducting a search, they found only a floating tackle box and pieces of torn clothing. The boat had been in the same spot for hours before drifting, according to the Global Positioning System tracker. Ryan's choice to hand-feed the shark might have set off a predatory reaction, although marine experts later hypothesized that the shark had probably been lured in by the smell of fish. Despite not usually hunting humans, great whites were apex predators, powerful and opportunistic, and were unpredictable. Ryan Foster became another cautionary tale, and another name was added to the list of those who underestimated the ocean. In Exmouth, the incident became a point of discussion among local fishermen. Some shook their heads, calling it foolishness. Others simply accepted it as another reminder of the ocean's indifference to human arrogance. Ryan Foster had spent his life chasing the sea, always teetering on the edge of risk. Ultimately, the sea had swept him away, quickly, brutally, and without hesitation. And the great white shark, the last creature to see him alive, had simply done what it was born to do. The Florida coast had always been a place of solace for Jack Turner. The vast Atlantic stretched endlessly before him, a liquid mirror reflecting the early morning sun. It was May 20th, 2022, and the waters off the coast of Cedar Key, Florida, were unusually calm. A seasoned kayaker, Jack had spent years navigating these waters. He knew their moods, their dangers, and their beauty. But that morning, as he paddled further from shore, he had no idea that he was about to become the center of one of the most harrowing tragedies the area had ever seen. Jack was a man of solitude. At 37, he had found comfort in the ocean, escaping the noise of everyday life by venturing into the deep. In his early 20s, he began kayaking because he was drawn to the freedom it provided. Hundreds of trips had been made in his bright yellow kayak, gliding through mangrove tunnels and over reefs. As usual, he set out alone on this specific day, intending to arrive at a small deserted sandbar about 5 miles offshore. He had previously traveled this route, but the ocean was erratic. It was an uneventful first few miles. The water was a deep shade of blue, changing to lighter tones where the sandy bottom was visible while the sky was clear. Schools of fish darted beneath the surface, and on occasion, he spotted a dorsal fin cutting through the waves, most likely a harmless blacktip shark. Jack had seen sharks before. He respected them as part of the ocean's ecosystem, but he had never felt threatened. However, as he paddled into deeper waters, he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Tiny ripples formed on the surface as the wind picked up slightly. Only the rhythmic sound of his paddle cutting through the water broke the eerie silence. He adjusted the GoPro mounted on the front of his kayak, making sure it was recording. Jack often filmed his journeys, both for memories and to share with friends who were too scared to venture out to sea. Then something changed. His kayak suddenly jolted violently against the side. It wasn't the typical bump caused by floating debris or an inquisitive fish. This was much stronger. Instinctively, he stopped paddling and looked around. The water beneath him darkened, a shadow moving just below the surface. His pulse quickened. It was big. Before he could react, the kayak lurched violently, tilting onto its side. Jack barely had time to register what was happening when the water exploded around him. A massive tiger shark, at least 12 feet long, had rammed the kayak with terrifying speed. In an instant, Jack was in the water. The shock of the cold Atlantic engulfed him, but his instincts took over. Years of experience had trained him to stay calm. He reached for the overturned kayak, but the shadow beneath him surged upward before he could pull himself up. The shark struck again. This time, it wasn't just a warning. Jack felt the unmistakable pressure of teeth sinking into his leg. The pain was instant and searing. He thrashed, kicking with all his might, but the shark's grip was relentless. Blood clouded the water around him, turning the blue depths into a murky red haze. The GoPro still attached to the kayak captured the chaos. The camera bobbed in and out of the water, recording glimpses of Jack's desperate struggle. His breathing was ragged, his arms flailing as he tried to fend off the predator. The shark released him momentarily, only to circle back. Jack knew he had to get back on the kayak. Despite the agony coursing through his leg, he reached for the kayak, using what little strength he had left to pull himself halfway onto it. But the shark wasn't finished. A second strike sent him back into the water. His vision blurred, the salt water stinging his eyes. Every movement felt slower, as if time itself was dragging him down. His limbs grew weak, the blood loss taking its toll. He could hear the distant sound of waves, but it felt far away, unreachable. The shark reappeared and clamped down on his torso. He gave a strangled gasp as the force sent a shockwave through his body. His hands, which had been tearing at the kayak, were now limp and floating by his sides. His life events played in fragmented images as his thoughts wandered, including his early fishing excursions, his first paddle handling experience, and the laughter of friends who had cautioned him against going out by himself. Afterward, there was silence. As the lens captured the open ocean, the GoPro continued to float. The kayak rocked gently with the waves as it drifted aimlessly. Once it stopped moving, the water became motionless. A fishing boat happened upon the scene a few hours later. The crew of the Maribel had been searching for a good spot to drop their lines when they noticed the lone kayak, its hull bearing deep gouges where the shark's teeth had torn through. They spotted the GoPro still recording, but Jack was gone. The footage would later be recovered and analyzed by experts who had seen shark attacks before, but rarely with such ferocity. The authorities scoured the waters, but all they found were remnants. Shredded gear, a paddle floating miles away, and a single torn life vest. News of Jack Turner's fate spread quickly. His story became a warning, a chilling reminder of the ocean's unforgiving nature. Some called it a freak accident, others a tragic consequence of venturing too far alone. But those who knew Jack understood that he had died doing what he loved, in a place that had always felt like home. The sea, in all its beauty and danger, had claimed him. And in the endless expanse of the Atlantic, his story became another whispered legend, carried by the waves. The sun hung low over the crystalline waters of the Bahamas, casting a golden glow across the shallow sandbanks of the Exuma Cays. It was March 8, 2024. And the secluded location had been chosen for its postcard-perfect beauty, turquoise shallows, swaying palm trees, and most importantly, the presence of sharks. The concept was bold, a high-fashion photo shoot featuring live bull sharks, an attempt to capture nature's raw, untamed beauty alongside the elegance of modern couture. Clara Jenkins, a 27-year-old rising star in the modeling industry, had been hand-picked for the shoot. Known for her striking features and fearless attitude, she had built a reputation for taking on unconventional projects. When her agent presented her with the opportunity, Clara hesitated at first, but was reassured by the production team's claims that everything would be controlled and safe. They said the sharks were accustomed to human presence. There would be expert handlers in the water, and the risks were minimal. The team assembled early that morning. Photographer Dorian Wexler, known for his avant-garde style, directed the shoot. His assistant, Lyle Purton, fussed over the camera equipment, ensuring everything was ready. Marine coordinator Felix Draycott and his team of shark handlers had been working with the animals for weeks, carefully selecting those deemed safe for close interaction. They had done similar projects before, and there was never an incident. The setup was elaborate. Clara would pose in a flowing, translucent gown, standing waist-deep in the water as the sharks glided around her. The first shots went smoothly. The sleek and powerful bull sharks moved languidly through the shallows, their dark forms slicing through the water beneath the surface. The photographers captured stunning images, Clara poised and ethereal, the sharks adding a sense of danger and mystique. But then something changed. Felix, standing on the nearby platform, noticed a shift in the shark's behavior. The water, previously calm, seemed more restless. The largest of the sharks, a nearly 10-foot-long female named Marrow, circled back more frequently, her movements sharper and more deliberate. The other sharks, once indifferent, became more alert. Felix frowned, signaling to his team. Something wasn't right. Clara remained unaware of the subtle shift in the animal's demeanor. She had been instructed to hold a specific pose, arching her back slightly as the fabric of her dress billowed in the water. The camera clicked rapidly. Then, without warning, Marrow lunged. The shark struck with terrifying speed, an explosion of movement and force. Clara barely had time to react before she felt the crushing pressure around her right thigh. The pain was instant and overwhelming. The water churned violently as the bull shark clamped down, shaking its head in a brutal, instinctual motion. Screams erupted from the shore. Felix and his team dove in immediately, but the shark had already begun to drag Clara deeper. The shallow waters that seemed so tranquil moments ago were now clouded with blood. Clara struggled, her hands clawing at the surface, but the force of the animal was unimaginable. Felix reached her first, ramming into the shark's side with all his strength. Another handler, Ezra Cormack, grabbed Clara under the arms, pulling with desperate urgency. The shark, perhaps startled by the sudden resistance, released its grip for a fraction of a second. That was enough. Felix and Ezra yanked Clara free, dragging her through the water toward the shore. Lyle was already on the phone with emergency services, his voice shaking as he relayed the situation. Dorian stood frozen, his camera still clutched in his hands, the lens dripping with salt water. Clara was hauled onto the sand, her leg a mangled mess of torn flesh and exposed bone. The wound was catastrophic. Blood poured freely, staining the white sand crimson. Felix pressed his hands against the wound, applying as much pressure as possible while shouting for a tourniquet. Ezra ripped off his own belt, cinching it tightly around her thigh. Clara's face had gone pale, and her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Felix kept repeating something like staying awake, though his voice was distant in her mind. The world around her blurred, the voices, the movement, the pain all melting into a nauseating haze. The minutes stretched unbearably long before the sound of an approaching helicopter cut through the chaos. A medevac team descended, moving with clinical efficiency. They stabilized Clara as best they could before lifting her onto the stretcher. The last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the receding shoreline, the water still swirling with faint ribbons of red. The aftermath of the attack sent shockwaves through the modeling industry. The shoot had been intended to push boundaries to create something that had never been seen before. Instead, it sparked a firestorm of controversy. Critics condemned the recklessness of involving wild predators in fashion photography. Questions arose about the ethics of using animals in controlled yet unpredictable environments. Clara lived, but her recovery was a difficult and drawn-out process. Surgeons in Nassau worked for hours to save her leg. She had months of physical therapy after undergoing several reconstructive procedures. Resuming walking turned into a struggle that she was determined to win. Her modeling career, which had been booming, suddenly took a turn for the worse. As unpredictable as ever, the industry had moved on. Clara, however, did not vanish. She started speaking out against using apex predators as props and became a strong supporter of responsible wildlife interaction. The pictures from that fateful day, however, were never made public. Dorian Wexler erased every frame after being horrified by what had happened. There were rumors that some pictures were still hidden in a private archive, but no one was brave enough to reveal them. Eventually, the Exuma Kai's waters regained their pristine splendor. The sharks continued to glide through the shallows, indifferent to human affairs. A silent reminder of the fine line separating order and chaos, Marrow continued to swim somewhere beneath the waves. The waters off the coast of Key Largo, Florida, were dark and restless on the night of July 15, 2023. The ocean stretched endlessly under the pale moonlight, its surface broken only by the gentle rocking of the Neptune Folly, a privately owned yacht anchored just a few miles offshore. On board, the air was thick with the scent of salt, liquor, and cigarette smoke, as a group of friends celebrated what had been intended as a weekend of indulgence and escape from their everyday lives. Jeremy Brooks, a 29-year-old financial analyst from Atlanta, had been the loudest among them, his laughter echoing across the deck as he sloshed his whiskey from side to side. He had always been the kind of man who pushed limits, who demanded the night last just a little longer, and the drinks flow just a little faster. That night was no different. Around him, his companions, Elijah Vance, a former college roommate turned real estate broker, Curtis Langford, an old friend from his high school football days, and two women they had met earlier that week, Bianca Torres and Celeste Moreau, were in varying states of intoxication. Music blasted from the yacht's speakers, a careless mix of old rock and modern pop, muffled only slightly by the crashing waves against the hull. As the night dragged into the early morning hours, Jeremy's enthusiasm did not wane. If anything, it had intensified. He teetered on the edge of the yacht, the warm breeze whipping against his face, and his glass dangling precariously from his fingertips. There was a wildness in his eyes, the kind that often preceded reckless decisions. Slasha, though just as drunk, still had enough sense to notice. He muttered something about Jeremy needing to sit down, drink some water, and think twice about whatever was going through his head. But advice, especially those given under the influence, rarely carried any weight. Jeremy laughed loudly and unbothered. Then, without a second thought, he threw his arms into the air and launched himself overboard. The splash was louder than expected. The group fell silent for a moment, their drunken haze interrupted by an instinctual realization that something had just gone terribly wrong. The ocean at night was an abyss. The inky blackness swallowed Jeremy whole, and for a few long seconds there was nothing. No movement, no sound beyond the gentle lapping of the waves against the yacht's side. Then his head broke the surface, and he let out a triumphant whoop, his laughter carrying over the water. Elijah groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. Curtis swore under his breath. Bianca and Celeste exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether this was still funny or if it had crossed into something more unsettling. Jeremy floated on his back, staring up at the sky. The stars above him were endless, and the universe was vast and indifferent. He was weightless, the alcohol in his system making everything feel distant and unreal. He kicked lazily, sending ripples across the water. Then, a sound, faint but unmistakable. A splash, not his own. At first he ignored it. Probably a fish, maybe even a dolphin. He had seen plenty of them earlier in the day. But then there was another splash. Closer this time. A shift in the water. A presence. On the yacht, Elijah leaned over the railing. He called Jeremy to get back, but his voice was slurred and urgent. Jeremy turned, treading water slowly. There was something about the way the ocean moved around him now. It felt different, less welcoming, less forgiving. A shadow passed beneath him. His breath hitched, then a sudden sharp tug at his leg. Panic set in instantly. He kicked hard, his instincts screaming at him to get back to the boat and out of the water. But the ocean had already turned against him. The pull was strong and relentless. A flash of movement, then pain. Jeremy screamed. The sound cut through the night, sharp and raw. On the yacht, the others scrambled, their intoxication making them sluggish and useless. Curtis grabbed a flashlight, sweeping it over the surface of the water. What they saw made their stomachs drop. The water around Jeremy was no longer just dark, it was red. Thick blooming clouds spread in the waves, illuminated by the beam of light. And then the fins. Not one, not two, not three, not four, but more. The sharks had come swiftly, drawn by the splashing chaos, and the scent of blood was now seeping into the current. Jeremy thrashed, but it was futile. The first bite had been to his calf, but the second was worse, ripping into his side, tearing flesh with ease. The pain was unbearable, but the adrenaline kept him fighting, even as the inevitable became clear. Elijah threw a life preserver into the water, but it was meaningless. A cruel joke against the forces of nature. Jeremy's screams turned into gurgles. His movements slowed, the water churned violently around him. Each time the flashlight caught a glimpse of his face, it was twisted in agony, his eyes wide with terror. Then, he disappeared beneath the surface. The group stood frozen, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The music still played in the background, absurdly out of place. For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence. Slowly, the red in the water began to thin, carried away by the current. The ocean reclaimed its stillness, its darkness. Jeremy Brooks was gone. The Coast Guard arrived hours later, alerted by a frantic, sobbing call from Bianca. The search was brief. There was nothing to find. There were no remains, only the tattered remnants of Jeremy's swim trunks, shredded and floating aimlessly in the waves. Reports later confirmed that the waters where the yacht had been anchored were known for shark activity, particularly at night when the predators were most active. Experts speculated that the combination of alcohol-induced erratic movements and blood in the water had made Jeremy an easy target. The story made headlines as a cautionary tale of recklessness and the unforgiving nature of the sea. His friends, forever haunted by the night, would go on to recount the horror to anyone who asked. Their voices hollow, their expressions haunted. But the ocean did not care. The waves rolled on, as indifferent as ever.